Hi, I'm Dr. Linda F. Williams. I'm a survivor of sexual assault, domestic violence, and a 17-year marriage to a man who was later convicted as a rapist. I was always raised by my mother that you don't want to have any kids before you're married. No man wants a floozy. No man wants to raise anybody else's children. And so that was ingrained in me. And another thing of significance that was ingrained in me growing up was you made your bed, so you lie in it. Now, I know that that was the way I internalized that was not necessarily the way my mother. And so for some reason, this guy was this other guy on campus. Everybody on campus do your business, all right? She pregnant. She claiming it's so-and-so's. We don't believe because she's sleeping around, right? But this one guy still cared about me, and he wanted to have a relationship with me, so I went along with it. And I'm sure without knowing it, that whole thing about no man will ever want you, yada, yada, yada. This man knew that this was not his child. I was showing when he came on the scene, okay? And so I got into this relationship with this guy, yada, yada, started living with him. Domestic violence, here we go, getting your kicked every minute. It's like walking on eggshells. You never knew what was going to set this joker off. I'm on the campus of Eastern Michigan University. It's 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm in nothing but a nightgown, barefoot, and I'm just out of my mind. Now, I got to tell y'all, a lot of times when you have lost it, when you have had the nervous breakdown, you're clueless. You're in straight up survival mode. And I wound up going to the police station. Neighbors calling them because I get my beat. People calling all the time. And every single time, this joker, my husband, I wound up in Chicago, separated from the kids. And it was just one toxic relationship after another. Now, another connector to this story is that while I was from pillar to post trying to work with social services in order to get my kids in a place for my kids, they had me staying in places like, imagine in the 1970s, it's an old abandoned gas station, just a little small structure. They had taken out the gas pumps. They put me in there, no refrigerator, no stove, no place to raise a kid. Then I wound up bouncing to staying in hotels. And I invite this guy over, and the next thing you know, I'm flat on my stomach getting sodomized till I was bleeding. And he just got up and left without a word. Well, it would be 30 years later where somebody that I told the whole story, I didn't clean it up. I just told them the straight up story. I invited this guy over, yada, yada, yada. And the guy asked me this simple question, and it changed my life. He said, "Did you go to the doctor?" The first thing I said was, "Why would I go to the doctor and let him know I did something that stupid?" Now, until he said, "Did you go to the doctor?" the thought had never crossed my mind to go get checked out or to report that mess. Why? Again, internalizing this as my fault. I deserved it. You made your bed, you lie in it. And so for over 30 years, I held that self-loathing and that shame to the point where I could not tell that story. This man never cursed, but one day he got me on the phone. He said, "Linda, I wanted to tell you that's effed up. That's effed up. That man has to own what he did to you. That's not your responsibility that he did that to you. That's not your fault. Let him own that part." And then he explained to me that maybe I was raised more with a suck it up when your kids, mama might let the little girl cry. "I'm sorry, baby, that you got hurt," and let her cry. And dad, if he's dealing with the little boy, he might say, "Oh man, come on, you all right? Boys don't cry. Go on out there, try it again." See, I got to go on out there, try it again type of mentality. So I was living my life where if I made a mistake, I had to suffer. If I made a mistake, I didn't even think to call home and tell my parents, number one, that I had been raped. Number two, that I was living with a man that was kicking my every time you turn around. I'm going through life. 30 years later, I finally let that go. And I gotta tell you, when I was writing my book, it took me 7 years and 6 days to write this book. It's called Whose Apple Is It Anyway? And several times when I was writing that book over that 7-year period, I just got writer's block. I couldn't write. For some reason, I tried to force it. And it was just like words coming out of my mouth and falling like anvils. Nothing made sense. And this day that I got that revelation about having been raped 30 years before, believing I deserved it, that it's all my fault. Once I learned the truth, that my responsibility began and ended at the point where I invited that man over. Began and ended, full stop. I didn't see a neon signs. I'm a rapist, I'm a rapist, I'm a rapist. And once I understood that I had to separate myself from his responsibility, let him own the wrong he did to me, that I could stop being the wrong that I endured at the hands of this man. He may as well have kept me in his grip for 30 freaking years. For all intents and purposes, I was still in that man's grip for 30 years. Once I got that revelation, I could go back and write the book. So now I'm stuffing. Man up, suck it up, right? When you're like that, you cannot keep going through life from a reactionary standpoint. At some point, you have got to stop, turn around, and face the past. Unless and until you do, you'll be living the lie that that's the end of your story. And it's never the end of your story. My life reflects the danger of stuffing stuff and having a wrong mindset like you deserved it. It's all your fault. And when you do that, you take on a shame that will not allow you to tell your story. Trauma will steal your voice every freaking time, unless until you begin to see and realize and embrace the truth that whatever you've been through is not the end of your story. See, we all have stories. We have stories we don't tell. We have stories we have tell. We have stories we've forgotten. But we don't understand that those stories become the scripts by which we live our lives. Okay? It's running your life whether you see it or not. Until I shed the false shame of that rape that had occurred to me 30 years before, until I got the gumption to tell that story straight up, no chaser, not hiding from it, not trying to leave stuff out. Until I did that, I didn't get free of that. But let me tell you what all of that stuff and that trauma did. I wound up married to a man I didn't even know was a rapist. In our marriage, we went to jail for sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault. Now, the story he told me was that he was freebasing and stuff. I couldn't keep up with his behind, so I'm at home in the bed, right? And he would pull these disappearing acts and stuff, and I didn't know what was going on. But apparently, this girl owed him money for some. I'm believing that this girl said, well, I don't have the money, so why don't you take it out in trade, meaning that, I'll just sleep with you, because I understand she was a or something. And so he didn't want to take it out in trade, and so they got into a fight, and he said he pulled a knife, and she lied and said that he had raped her. Multiple times between the time that he was charged with that offense and the time that he actually was sentenced for that offense, I asked him and gave him an opening to tell me the truth about his relationship with that girl. And he always stood his ground. I was not dealing with that girl. It was about a thing, and she lied. Well, I'm sitting there in the lobby of the courtroom November 4th. No, it was November 9th, 1989. And they just snatched him out and convicted him of rape, of aggravated sexual assault, right? So I'm still not waking up. I moved up to Michigan. We were in Chicago. And then some kind of way, I figured out how to order all of his records or something. And I ordered all of his court records, and I sat and went through them. And this guy had a record going all the way back to the 70s of women accusing him of raping. Now, what you have to understand is until like the 80s, mid 80s, late 80s, women didn't get a play in court. They were disrespected. It was blame the victim. So if you reported a crime, you were probably going to get dragged through the ringer. So that would explain why all of those other events didn't go through. There were no convictions, but it told me something. So that's how I found out about his past. Now, I also found out the reason he kept keeping me away from his daughter, because he and I never had any kids. And I wanted so bad to tell his daughter that she needed to keep her baby girl away from her father because he might do something to her. So it was months that passed after we separated, and that same daughter called me and just told me everything. You know, he was sleeping with my older sister and yada yada, and then he beat my brother within an inch of his life just because he got himself locked out of the apartment, and all of that stuff came to the fore while I'm trying not to drag her into my mess, so she already knew. When you see somebody who's married to found out that he's a murderer, or married found out he was doing sexual assault or whatever, the first thing out of our mouth is the judgmental, how could you not know? And then you want to blame that wife for what he did. But I'm telling you, I've lived it. If a joker doesn't want you to know his dirt, you will not know his dirt. We as women, especially if we've been traumatized, we can fall in love with somebody's potential. We can fall in love with a man because we see all the good that God created him to be that never happened. And what we ignore is the fact that we are living with the repercussions of how they dealt with or failed to deal with their own trauma. So we're not facing the truth of who he believes he is, which is what's slapping us in the face every day. We're still hanging on to that fantasy that's waiting to happen. That fantasy of who he used to be, or who he could be, the him that he had never realized. And we have to understand that you can't be in love with somebody's potential. How all of this affected my children was that they had to pay the consequences for my life decisions. And I didn't get to raise them. When I look in hindsight, I'm so grateful because one of them was raised by my first husband's side of the family, and the other one was raised by my parents. It was years before I understood how they were seeing me and the situation as kids. My son thought he wasn't good enough. You know, why am I not good enough for her? Why is she prioritizing this one and that one? And, you know, what's wrong with me? I mean, I found this out years later. But my daughter went through it. She was raised in the ghetto streets of Detroit, and she was very angry, very angry. I had to go to Southfield. That her grandmother put her in a private school there in Southfield, Michigan. Until I faced my trauma, until I shed the false shame so that I could be honest and vulnerable from the heart and talking to them as teenagers. I wouldn't have done this when they were little kids, but become teenagers and young man and young woman, that I had to own it. I apologized to them for not being there because I stayed separated from them from 1979 when I left that campus and moved to Chicago. I apologized to them for not being there, and I was surprised. They said, "Mama, it's not like you weren't gone. We saw you all the time." But in my mind, that wasn't good enough. I wasn't there. But they were right. Graduations, I was there when my son, used to come up and see my son and spend time with him and all of that. But to me, that wasn't good enough. To their mind, at least you weren't completely absent in our lives. It's been very difficult to work through that with them. Now, it came around with my son and everything, but the major turning point with my son was him reading that book I wrote. and telling me, Mama, I had no idea. I understand now. He said, I can't tell you how I understand now. And that brought us closer. My daughter, we were working through all of that too. So, but the bottom line is she's got 4 beautiful children. She's living a life that her heart desires. She loves being a mother. So she's living the life that I never lived. And they're both kind of drawing the line for that trauma, and they've begun to take it to a new level so that maybe her children will never be molested. Her children are being raised in a household with both of their parents, are loving parents, God-fearing parents, right? Getting all the attention that they need. That's stuff that I never gave them. I was still totally oblivious, however, to how trauma was playing out in my life. I'm still having toxic relationships. So I'm going to more focus and get satisfaction from my professional accomplishments, because that took my mind off of the cesspool that was my life. It's a human condition thing, really, when you begin to drive yourself in arenas where you can realize measurable success and outcomes. And you don't understand in the middle of that the other side of your life is important too. And you will have to face that other side of your life when the professional side of your life is over. So I'm just putting myself into going to school. When my father died, he died in his sleep in 93. And I had this conversation with my dad that, you know what? I want to go back to school and get my degree. Okay, baby, you do that. And something flew out my mouth that I had never even thought. This wasn't even thought. I said, shoot, get my degree. I'm going to get my PhD. And he just kind of lit up. Okay, baby, you do that. So when he died, the way I cope with his death, I just started going to school like a mad woman. Get one degree, get the next degree, get the next degree, get the next degree, right? It's the same dynamic with your professional life. If you are suffering a pain that you are running from, you're going to run to either something positive or negative in order to divert your focus from that pain. And that's what I did with the going to school thing. That's what I did as I grew through my emotions and learned how to better cope with how trauma was playing out with my professional relationships. You just focus on the good stuff. You focus on the stuff that's measurable success. Why? It's less painful to do that. It's less painful to do. Look, there are a lot of professional women rocking the boardroom, and their life is torn from the floor up. They do not see, or they may even see and not understand how to navigate why their life is all tore up. Why they keep going in and out of these toxic relationships. Why am I heartbroken for the 99th time? Why am I misunderstood again? Why can't I get that together? Bad relationships with the husband. If you're married, might be married to an abuser. You don't never know how trauma played out in somebody's life. You know, you don't deal with all of that. Because you have something before you where you can shine, and it'll take your mind off of the pain. But nobody gets to skip that, y'all. If you were traumatized as a child, and you were traumatized at a point in your developmental growth where it kind of stunted you, is what we call arrested development in psychology, then you're going to be stuck at that age on some emotional level. I don't care if you're 99. Okay, but we don't get to skip those developmental stages, y'all. And at some point, even the most successful professional woman will get tired to the point where I just want fulfillment in my life. And to navigate that, you need a lot of support. This is how you take revenge on a past you cannot change. Make it count. I used to work across the hall from a lady. I didn't know her well, but you know, when you work in the same building, you kind of see people all the time. And she had a daughter that she just cherished this girl. This girl was her entire life. Well, one day, that daughter got into a watercraft accident and it killed her. And I watched this woman die little by little by little every day. She didn't know what to do with herself. That was, I believe, her only child. And she just could not deal with this. And I remember I went across the hall to see her one day, and she was talking about her daughter again. And it was just such pain in what she was saying. And all of a sudden, out of my mouth, I said, "You make it count." And she just kind of stopped and looked at me. I said, "Is there anything that your daughter used to care about, a cause she used to care about, a hobby she used to have? Is there something she experienced in her life that she would like to you pick up the gauntlet and advocate for?" And she thought for a minute. She said, "Yeah." And I said, "Then you make it count. You be her legacy and find something that will honor her and make her life count." And I saw something come over that woman, and I never saw another hopeless minute. And she later told me how much that meant to her. So make your life and trauma count. So you make it count by accepting that you went through it. You accept that it's something you can't change, but you can take revenge on it. That's what we get to do. We can't change it, but we can take revenge on it by making it count, and make it count by embracing your healing journey. That's going to include having to cut loose a bunch of mofos that ain't right for you. I don't care if it's a friendship, a boyfriend, whatever. They're going to have to fall by the wayside. Own that. Understand that you don't have to believe that your past is the end of your story. Pick up the cosmic pencil and start rewriting your life. Let me talk to the person that's sitting right now in a domestic violence situation. Keep your mouth shut. Be careful who you're talking to, who you're telling your plans. Begin to make a plan to get out, okay? I just ran. I didn't have nothing, not clothes on. But I went back to get my clothes out the closet. The cops took me in there to get my clothes, and everything was slashed up. He had cut up everything. I had absolutely nothing. But you can walk out of that situation if you plan correctly and seek out people you trust, and just don't announce your plan. Now, if you're sitting there and you're somebody who is dealing with what we call complex post-traumatic stress disorder, that's CPTSD, then that means that you have endured some kind of ongoing, long-term abuse and trauma at the hands of somebody that had more control than you do. Then I want you to seek out people. Just start with YouTube. Seek out people that specialize in CPTSD. The reason you haven't been able to find a good therapist is because not every therapist is trained in how to provide services to somebody suffering from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That's not your fault. I'm seeing somebody that's sitting there and they don't understand that they're traumatized. All they know is that there's a dark cloud that just engulfs them throughout their lives, and they're sitting in that now and they're beginning to feel hopeless. What I'm going to tell you is, again, that is not the end of your story. Pray for the courage to turn around and face whatever has you in its grips, and understand that you get to rewrite your story. Hope, purpose in the suffering. Your life counts. You matter. There's somebody out here in this world that only you can reach.